Hello, friendly neighborhood nerds. If you want to hear interviews from industry pros, get first looks, and have access to endless comic content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell!
What's up, friendly neighborhood nerds? This is Judah Rad, and I'm here with Robo Strange. Welcome to The Kick Boost!
Boost.
Today, we have a very special guest. He's the Ringo Award-nominated writer of Spencer and Locke, Going to the Chapel, the upcoming Grand Theft Astro, and today we're going to talk about the OZ, not to be confused with the OC. Former editorial intern at DC, review editor at Newsarama, and he's worked for CBS, Netflix, and Universal Studios. Today, he is on our show. Thanks for joining us, David.
Kind of a big deal.
Hi, thank you guys so much for having me. Real pleasure to be on the show, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm so excited to be here to chat with you guys about my new comics Kickstarter project, the OZ, which we're in the home stretch right now. Our Kickstarter wraps up in the early morning hours of Wednesday, September 16th. So we are down to we're wrapping things up. And for those who have not checked out our Kickstarter page, the OZ is what if Mad Max and the Hurt Locker took place in the Wizard of Oz.
Hell yeah. Sold.
We've recontextualized Dorothy Gale killing the Wicked Witch of the West as something like a botched regime change. And so when she clicks her heels together and goes back home to Kansas, she's inadvertently left Oz in a power vacuum that leads to years of brutal civil war.
Damn.
And so the OZ picks up a generation later with Dorothy's granddaughter and namesake, who's a disillusioned Iraq war veteran. She's come back home with some real trauma and some real scars and some real guilt, and she's trying to put the pieces of her life back together in Liberty, Kansas. Unfortunately, a tornado strikes, and this new Dorothy finds herself stranded in the war-torn land of Oz. So she's going to have to confront her past and her grandmother's former friends if she hopes to survive the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ.
The OZ.
Well, that's a horse of a different color.
Shit.
Love the deep cut. Thank you for that. We will have some horses of a different color, I promise, in issue 2.
The
Dope.
color of blood. So
I usually I do all this editing, and so no pressure. I will get this done. Hopefully, not as late as I usually am. We'll get it out today. Hopefully.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So you have such an eclectic background, to say the least. Can you give us a little bit more insight into your comics journey? Take
Sure.
that as you will.
First off, thank you for saying how eclectic it was, because when I was going through it, I always was thinking, how is this going to affect anything? Just like my stories, my path to comics was certainly not straightforward. It was less of a straight line and more of a zigzag. I've worked as a newspaper reporter. I've worked in publicity at CBS. I've worked as an assistant in Hollywood. I've worked as the reviews editor for Newsarama. I was there for 12 years. I just recently wrapped up my tenure there. You when you're in the middle of it, you always think, oh, how's this going to affect anything? And then when you look back on it, you realize that you're picking up crucial survival skills that you're going to pick up later in your career. Working as a newspaper reporter, not only did I cover the crime beat, which kind of helped me with my books like Spencer and Locke, but also beats like the local mental health beat and the local military beat, which really informed my take on Dorothy in the OZ. But it also made it so I wasn't afraid of a word count. I wasn't afraid of writing on a deadline. I write kind of modularly, so my scenes can kind of I just lop off the transitions and I shift them around. Things like working at CBS, meanwhile, taught me how to do publicity and really kind of learn how to pound the pavement and realize that it doesn't matter how great your story is, although you should strive for it to be as excellent as you can. Accessibility is really important, making sure that people don't have to have read a bunch of books or watched a bunch of seasons of TV to get what you're coming from, and making sure that you promote it. I don't believe the books sell themselves. I think getting the word out sells books. And so things like that. Newsarama, of course, really kind of forced me to read everything. And it really taught me the lay of the land of the industry. It really kind of forced me to figure out what my voice was, what I liked, what I didn't like, to articulate that and really defend my points. I felt like I learned from a lot of people's mistakes, and I kind of was able to learn different tips and tricks that I've adopted in my writing since. It's one of those things. I always say comics are never an overnight success.
Right.
I've been in the periphery of the industry since summer of 2008. And, I only feel like now I'm starting to get traction. It's not a fluke anymore that like people might like my work. And it's something I tell my younger siblings. My younger siblings are in their mid-20s. I'm in my mid-30s. And I always say that success in any industry, particularly the arts, particularly comics, it's not something that's measured in weeks or even months. It's something that's measured in years.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, I'm just trying to build my do my reps and earn my place and earn readers' trust. And projects like the OZ, it really does at times feel like a leap of faith rewarded.
It's funny. I like it when you were interviewing somebody and then they just kind of answer the questions you already had. So I was gonna say, there's 4 days left in the OZ Kickstarter campaign. It looks like last time I looked, you had like over 1,000 backers, and so first part of my question is, what is your secret? And really, you just kind of detailed it. So that's great. I appreciate that. But the second part is, with the OZ specifically, where did that concept come from? Did it just come to you one day? Or?
Yeah. Well, what happened was, for those who aren't familiar with my breakout book, Spencer and Locke, the high concept for that book was, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? Mm-hmm. And that's the sort of book that people really liked. That book. We were nominated for Ringo Awards. We were optioned very quickly. But that looking in the rear view, that might look one way. Having been in the trenches of it and making that book, it was not a sure thing whatsoever.
Right.
I was half convinced I was going to get run out of the industry. Because when you have a book like that, you do not do it quietly.
That's right.
I think part of our success was so many people just staring to see if we were going to stick the landing or if I was going to eat dirt. Thankfully, we did. And I think they were surprised and I was surprised. So after that, I kind of gave myself permission to actually make a run at this, of being a comics writer. And so the OZ actually was one of the 3 ideas I came up with in the aftermath of Spencer and Locke. And I'd come up with the sequel, Spencer and Locke 2. I'd come up with my most recent book, Going to the Chapel, which was Die Hard meets Wedding Crashers. And then I said, well, I'm doing a lot of crime related books. I wanted to try a different genre. And what's sort of a big swing genre? Sci-fi, I've written sci-fi since then, but sci-fi is hard for me. You have to come up with a specific world, and you have to come up with these rules, and then the characters have to navigate around that. Mm-hmm. Fantasy, it can be the opposite. The rules of the world can really bend around your characters and your themes and metaphors of it all. And so I really, I've always gravitated to that. The characterization, really, if I can get my concepts around that, that's the most fun for me. And so I had written down a bunch of inspirations, things that I had read as a kid, a fantasy, things like Lord of the Rings or Lloyd Alexander or Piers Anthony or Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. And I wrote down Wizard of Oz. And as my cursor was flashing in the word Oz, I was just like, the word Oz, it's so short, but it's so iconic. What if it was an acronym for something? And I thought of DMZ, and then I thought the Occupied Zone.
That's right.
And really, the concept kind of struck me like a bolt of lightning. And I said, oh, this isn't just a fantasy book, it's a war story.
There it is.
And for me, it's always about, this is my second time doing a riff on pop culture. And for me, it'd be very easy to do something for shock value's sake, to say like Elmo's cooking meth and Oscar the Grouch's trash can.
Right.
But that's just like edginess for edginess' sake. Right. Nothing in the original text supports that. Whereas for the OZ or Spencer and Locke, for example, I always am saying, what about the original subject matter supports my thesis? So for the case of Spencer and Locke, it was, Calvin so vividly imagining his own best friend. What if that's not a charming quirk? What if that's a symptom of a deeper, darker pathology? What if that's his outlet for having such a horrific upbringing that his only escape was to invent his own best friend?
That's awesome. Here's a question for you, real quick.
Yeah.
So I don't, and it's okay if you don't want to answer. I know times are kind of crazy right now, and I don't want you to paint yourself into a corner. But does your own politics kind of inform how the rest of Oz is going to go with regard to? Because war is, war and the military-industrial complex and all that's kind of,
Yeah, I think there was definitely. every book that we do like this, and this was the same case with Spencer and Locke, and it's certainly the case with the OZ, is you have to walk that tightrope. You have to figure out, like, how can I tell this story in a way that feels sensitive and doesn't punch down on anybody? Because my thought is you want to treat your characters with dignity and empathy and respect, because ultimately that means you're treating your readers that way. People who do live with PTSD, people who have served. It's one of those things. I feel like in our period of history right now, I think we're a country that's in moral conflict with itself. I think that's sort of the best way to phrase it. And the OZ absolutely channels that in a big way. It's funny because I wrote this book. This book has been in development, like I said, for 3 years. But I feel like the scripts have not aged. Dorothy, as a former soldier, she's constantly weighing the moral calculus of war. She was somebody who, when she served in Iraq and Afghanistan, she was one of many boots on the ground. But by virtue of who her grandmother is in the land of Oz, everyone's looking to Dorothy for answers. And it's a very uncomfortable burden of leadership. She's always asking herself, what's the moral choice you can make when every decision I make can wind up with someone dead?
Right.
And so that is something that she's really going to have to reckon with over the course of our book. She's going to ask herself, is there a way to escape this cycle of violence? And so one of the advantages I had in the development of this book was not only had I interviewed veterans dealing with PTSD in my time as a newspaper reporter, but I happen to be lucky enough to be friends with people who have served. I'm buddies with somebody who was a combat medic in Afghanistan. We had a lot of conversations during the development of this book. Some of the granular stuff, am I using this lingo right? But some of it more of the macro level where, why do you think that the situation in Iraq and Afghanistan spiraled the way that it did, that we're still there? Why do you think we're still there? Is there any way to really, truly extricate ourselves? And so these are all questions that really kind of shaped the general arc of this story. Because I think, the reason why I felt comfortable pursuing this book, this concept, is if you've ever read the L. Frank Baum novels or if you've watched the Judy Garland film, the original Dorothy kills 2 wicked witches and convinces the Wizard of Oz to leave in like a week and then splits. And having grown up during the invasion of Iraq, I was in high school, I know that would not be a happy ending. That would not be tied with a neat little bow. That would look like Baghdad. That would look like Game of Thrones. Because when you have these really centralized figures of power, these dictators, when you uproot them, you don't realize they've put their tendrils in everything.
That's right.
And so suddenly, exactly. So the ripple effects, you can have the best of intentions, and it still can end really, really badly. And, in the case of, a young Kansas girl, in the case of the original Wizard of Oz, there's no way she would have possibly known. And that's kind of one of the saddest moments in the OZ to me, is that we see Grandma Dorothy, and time has not been kind to her, but she still thinks of Oz as this wonderful place, and she has no idea what has unfolded in
what
the
has
aftermath.
been left behind. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Judah and I are both vets, and so like reading through that is definitely something that we can relate to. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Because for me, it's always, how can we have our characters be as engaging and sympathetic as possible? Because for me, like, this is just my laziness as a writer. If I'm going to do the marathon of writing, we have 140 pages planned for this Kickstarter, or for our series, I should say. We're going to do 3 Kickstarters.
So about 5 issues.
So it's 6 issues. I wrote it as 6 standard-sized issues before realizing we could pair them together nicely as a 3-act structure. And for me, if I don't care about the character, if I don't find something compelling about them, I'm not going to be able to go the distance, let alone expect our readers to do that. And I think Dorothy, our new Dorothy, she's a really powerful character. I have found in all of my work, I tend to explore trauma to some degree. And I think trauma, it's something that not only it shapes us as people, but I think our traumas, our individual traumas, really shape the tenor of our lives. We always come back to them, whether it's something that's every once in a while or it's something that's more repetitive. I think the way that we try to tackle our traumas, it really that is what our lives are. And I think that fits to a narrative really well. And I think for, there are some people who they have traumas that they will live with for the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And having characters who, despite all odds, are able to, if not conquer their traumas, live with them. I think that's something that's really cathartic to people. And I think that's something that everybody can relate to. And I think that's always been something that I've found very interesting, and I think maybe important to explore as a storyteller.
Okay.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah. So, excuse me. You're kind of exploring a genre that I don't really have a name for off the top of my head, but it's like the theme I'm noticing is you're taking something sort of commonly accepted as playful, innocent, and cheerful,
Sure.
and pairing it with something heavy and jarring.
Sure.
It kind of reminds me of I don't know if you read this, but Grant Morrison's Klaus, which is a take on Santa Claus, where he's like a badass.
Where he's a badass action hero.
Or the one we saw with Winnie the Pooh and the Punisher. That was different.
Right.
The Punisher.
The Punisher. Oh, I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most people just refer to my genre as ruining my childhood.
Yeah.
But
yes.
For me, it's always what's the universal hook, because I will say my other book, Going to the Chapel, is actually much lighter on its feet. That's more of like an Ocean's 11 kind of swagger, because specifically I didn't want people to just think, oh, all he can do is dark and gritty. But I feel like for me it's always about what's universal here. If you've ever heard of The Wizard of Oz, you can read the OZ. If you've ever heard of Calvin and Hobbes, you can read Spencer and Locke. If you've ever been to a wedding or been in love or been dumped or broken up with or just had a dysfunctional family, you can read Going to the Chapel. Because for me, I think our responsibility as comics creators, especially on the indie scale where I don't have to report to anybody, I can do what I feel like doing, is I view the industry in existential terms. I say, what can we do to invite more readers to the table? What can we do to build a wider consensus? You mentioned Grant Morrison. I want to be a 30-year man like him. And the only way to do that, the only way to have my kids reading comics, is if we expand beyond the traditional meat and potatoes direct market. And so I'm always, I had a lot of success at conventions, and when they come back, I'm sure it'll be just as fun. But I had so many people come up and say, well, I don't really read comics. And I said, that's okay. You're our target audience. Being able to give something that has a very easy through line, a very easy sell, that's something that I always try to strive for as a writer. And I think having something like The Wizard of Oz, it kind of nudges the reader just a little bit past that threshold. They say, okay, there's something here I get. And that'll give them that extra little push they need to give us a shot. And once they do, I feel very confident, if not in my own writing. I think this is some of my strongest work as a writer, but I think as visually, this can stand toe-to-toe with anything in the direct market. Working with artist Ruben Rojas, colorist Whitney Kogar, letterer DC Hopkins, they elevate each other's work in a major way. And I strongly think, like, as somebody who has read everything in the direct market, these guys go toe-to-toe with anything in there. And that's really freeing for me as a writer, knowing that, hey, the worst review we can possibly get is, well, at least the art is good. And so that's very liberating for me, because in this case as an editor, is to get the possible for this story and then get out of their way. And, really just kind of help them to be like, all right, what's the best possible way we can tell this story?
Yeah.
And I'm working with such a terrific team that there's going to be something for everybody.
That's awesome. So what I was going to say before was, I'm pretty sure you have our list of questions up in front of you. Like, did you hack? So I'm just going to read it just how it was. You've assembled a great team with artists Ruben Rojas, colorist Whitney Kogar, and letterer DC Hopkins. How did you link up with these people, and what has the work process been like?
That's so funny. I feel like sometimes my journalism training kicks in, especially doing stuff with Newsarama, where I'm like, oh, this is what I would ask.
That's right.
So Ruben was the first person that I found for the team. I found him answering a call for artists on Twitter, which is bizarre because he's got this style that's like Dan Mora by way of Sean Murphy. It's just really beautiful. He's able to take these awesome action sequences and then turn on a dime for these really moody, dramatic scenes. And at the same time, Ruben is probably one of the single best designers I have ever worked with. He really fleshes out the Land of Oz beautifully. His take on the Tin Soldier, which you can see in our main cover on the Kickstarter, was
Very
so
badass.
amazing that we had just done 6 pages in a cover, and I told Ruben then and there, keep going. I promise I will get this book made. And so he was the first person. I think we connected in 2018. So like I said, this has been a while in the works. And I pitched him 3 different books actually, and the OZ was the one that he picked. He's a real fan of fantasy. He loves post-apocalyptic fiction. So this really hit Ruben right in the sweet spot. Whitney Kogar and DC Hopkins were recommended to me by my friend Michael Mocchio, who I was an editor once upon a time at Newsarama, and now he's an editor over at Mad Cave. And since he's worked at Scholastic and he's worked at Boom Studios, so I always love seeing Mike's upward trajectory. And I was talking with him about the OZ, and he said, you really should work with Whitney Kogar and DC Hopkins. They're terrific. I worked with them at Boom. And Dave Hopkins and we met at Denver Comic-Con shortly thereafter and immediately hit it off. He's such a chill, good-natured team player. He's the center of calm for kind of our creative operation, and just is very patient with me when I realized, I overwrote this line and I need to cut it in half. He's very considerate with how his contributions affect everybody else's, which is very. And then Whitney is our secret weapon. She was the final member of the team to join up. When I was an intern at DC, they really drilled it into me that art makes or breaks a comic. The colors make or break your art.
Nice.
And so I reached out to Whitney, and we talked a lot about. I said, "What's the Mad Max version of Star Wars look like?" Because that's what I want to be able to see. Sort of, you get that grit and that intensity, but you've got the variety of settings and that sweeping sense of scale and wonder.
Right.
The Land of Oz has teeth, but it doesn't make it any less beautiful.
That's right.
And just like you immediately know the difference between, say, Tatooine and Hoth and Dagobah and Cloud City. You know the difference between the Wicked Witch's castle or the Deadly Desert.
Emerald City.
Bombed out Emerald City, the mountaintops of Ix, the Animal Kingdom. They all each have their own unique vibe and temperature and internal high concepts and dangers for Dorothy and company to have to navigate. And so, Ruben and Whitney are a real dream team. They really, all 4 of us together really keep inspiring us to bring our A game. I don't usually do this for a series, but I was so excited by Ruben's work that I shotgunned through 6 scripts on this book because I was so in. And Ruben was so excited by the scripts that he's been really just knocking it out. And every time he sees Whitney's colors, he gets even more excited. And Whitney keeps seeing his inks and is super excited. And
Right.
I think poor Dave Hopkins sees us get really excited. He's like, okay, I got to do this perfectly.
There you go. And you have an awesome team just like that.
Perfect. Yeah, it's the perfect feedback loop, and it's a really fun way to make comics.
Going through
Sure.
Kickstarters, and this is nothing to take away from your writing because the writing in the story is phenomenal, but it seems like the make or break on these Kickstarters, what I see the most variance on is in the art. And even when we asked the question, like, what's the hardest part of getting your own book read? Multiple times we'll hear the answer, getting an artist willing to work for you, because it can be expensive or the quality's not there. But
Right.
I'll just say for everyone watching, this is a book, and by now I will have put images on the screen as you're talking and stuff like that, so they'll see it. It was what a great kind of combo to look at a Kickstarter that's not from a big organization, and you would never know it by looking at it. Like, so
Thank you.
chef's kiss.
Thank you. It's funny as you say it like that. I think you really articulated exactly what I keep going for. Is that look? There's a lot of books on the stands, whether it's physically or digitally. There's a lot of things competing for your time, attention, and money. There's Netflix, there's video games, there's your iPhone. We're
You're telling
also
me.
in a pandemic.
Yeah.
So I always want to work overtime to earn our readers. And so for this Kickstarter in particular, what we're doing is every single tier, starting at $5, you get the first issue PDF of Spencer and Locke and the first issue PDF of Going to the Chapel. That's
Nice.
just as our thank you for giving us a shot.
Nice.
Nice. That's a good deal.
At $10, you get 44 pages of the OZ because all of our issues are going to be double sized. That's just at $10. Also, since we've unlocked our one of our stretch goals, the digital comics extravaganza, you're going to be getting PDF first issues from creators like Justin Jordan, Ryland Grant, Frank Gogol, Kevin Eastman, the co-creator of the Ninja Turtles, a bunch of other creators as well. Because, like I said, there's a lot of things competing for your attention, and we
Awesome.
want to make sure that readers who aren't familiar with my work feel like they're getting a lot of bang for their buck for being these early adopters. And so, yeah, I feel like it's one of those things, you roll the dice when you do a Kickstarter.
Mhm.
And for me, every risk that I make, I want to make sure it's as calculated of a risk as I can make it. And I think by working with the best possible teams, that's what really helps snowball everything. People can hear me sell the OZs all day, but if the art isn't there and the story isn't there, it doesn't matter.
That's it.
And thankfully, I consider myself really fortunate, or maybe really picky, that I want to make sure that, like, I would like reading this book as a reader. I would like reading this book as a critic. And so that, I think, really informs the people that I work with. I want to make sure that I work with collaborators that are as hungry for success and quality as I am. And I've been really fortunate that Ruben and Whitney and DC, they just continue that streak.
Awesome.
So we talked to Justin Jordan a little while ago, and we determined that he has the second best beard in comics.
Mhm.
But it looks like you're taking a shot at the title. You're getting there.
You're on your
way.
I'm only a journeyman compared to Justin. And certainly I would never compete with somebody like a heavyweight like Alan Moore or.
That's number one. So yeah.
but a boy can dream. I figure I'm following in his footsteps both in comics and in bearddom.
Nice.
All right, a worthy goal. So full disclosure, I was not particularly familiar with your work until we scheduled this interview.
Yeah.
But researching for this episode and kind of familiarizing myself with the stuff you've done, all the concepts appeal to me. It's definitely, I'm excited to get into it. I'll probably order a copy of Going to the Chapel after this interview.
I was going to say, we've got deals for every, we've got different tiers. So people who are interested in my previous work, we've got deals like our print stockpile or digital stockpile, where you can get copies, either digital or print, of all of my previous trades. So if you want to get up to speed with my work, we've got options for everybody and at every level of budget.
Cool. That's awesome. That's good to know. So as an independent creator, this is a weird question, so bear with me.
Okay.
You're an independent creator, so you are your own company. You are David Pepose Incorporated, sort of.
Yeah.
So like looking at it like that, if you were a company, which you are, what is your mission statement?
We got there.
My mission statement is, I don't want to preach to the choir. I want converts. That is it.
Nice.
Accessibility and quality. I feel like for me, my favorite comics are the intersection of high concept and emotional engagement. And so, it's take as many swings as you can, get as many reps in as you can, earn trust where you can. And, it's one of those things. I love the comics industry, but I think there are practices that we've had over the last 30 years. And they were required for our success. It was the building of the direct market outside of sort of having things on newsstands. That we're not going back to that. But I think as a result, we've kind of circled the wagons a little bit, and sometimes we get more esoteric and inaccessible than we should be. And so, yeah, for me, I think Kickstarter has really reinforced for me the diaspora of readership. There are people who buy their books. They're the Wednesday warriors that go to the comic shop every week, and they're one of the pillars of the industry, so I don't need to disparage them one bit. I'm still working with outlets that, I love the direct market, but you've got people who buy primarily on Amazon or Comixology. You've got people who primarily buy their books at conventions, which I was really successful at. But there are people who don't do any of that. There's the Kickstarter community. There's the Webtoons community. I think any creator worth their salt, not only for their own self-sufficiency, but for the sake of the industry as a whole, we need to be navigating all these different groups. We need to be inviting them all to the same table and have them break bread together, because I think there is a thirst for comics out there. I think we've seen it in our multimedia. We've seen it in the sheer number of people on Kickstarter and Webtoons. Some of that is about content and what we're offering. We can't. I love superhero books just as much as the next guy. If somebody wanted to give me a Shazam or Doctor Strange books, I'd be all over it. But that is a drop in the bucket, and so that's why I'm doing stuff like police procedurals with Spencer and Locke, or doing kind of a new riff on a rom-com with Going to the Chapel, or taking kind of a dark twist on fantasy with the OZ. There's so many other genres out there, and we can't limit ourselves as an industry to just capes and tights. So I think, granted, as a one-man company, I have the advantage of saying that. I'm a motorcycle in a world of 18-wheelers. I have that mobility and that flexibility and that agility. So I don't disparage anybody who is making cape books, because they've got their own kind of directives that they have to navigate. But I think every creator on a grassroots level should be evangelizing. They should be bringing in new readers. And if you're putting out books that you can't explain to a stranger, then something's wrong. Because I think when you boil it down to its core, the act of storytelling is making strangers give a damn. And if I can't make a stranger care about this book, something's wrong. I'm not doing my job. And hopefully, like I said, going back to earlier, as a lazy writer who gets discouraged easily, I try to make sure that I find something interesting in the book itself for me. But if I can key in on that, that's something that I can explain to the readers, and hopefully they can see for themselves in the work itself.
Okay. Well, having said that, then, not including your own work, what are some of your favorite comic books?
Oh man, there's a ton. There's I'm a third generation comics reader, so I grew up, in the 90s. Eric Larson's Spider-Man was my first comic. Amazing Spider-Man 346.
Nice.
The issue right before they go to the island. Things like, what am I really digging right now? Classic Frank Miller. Daredevil, The Man Without Fear. Dark Knight Returns. Devin Grayson, her Batman Gotham Knights is like a touchstone for me. That it's criminal that it's not in trade. Things like Southern Bastards I really enjoyed. I've been reading Bleed Them Dry over at Vault, really digging that. These Savage Shores was really fun over at Vault. I just read Alex Pagnadel's Giga. That was really cool.
Oh, that's recent. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
we love Alex.
That's really cool. Alex is sweetheart. It's one of those things. Every time somebody asks me this, I always get like upset afterwards, because I'm like, oh, I totally missed a whole bunch of stuff. But also, we're in an interesting moment in the industry where it's like we're having almost, maybe it's overstating it to say we're having our Roman Polanski moment or Woody Allen. But like, for example, a year ago I would have no problem saying that Warren Ellis was a big influence.
Right.
Now it's a little harder to say. Where you have to navigate. You have to navigate. Well, his work had a real influence on me in terms of the way that he paces things and the intensity of it all. While still recognizing that the person is not someone who you should be celebrating or emulating.
That's right.
And so, that's, I think we're having our own growing pains in that regard.
Absolutely.
As an industry. But yeah, for me, there are creators like Rick Remender. I love how deliberate he is with his work, his pacing, his dialogue, his character work. I really take a lot of cues from him as far as action is concerned. Jeff Johns, I love the way that he's able to kind of mesh metaphor and character. If you haven't read, he's got an issue of Justice Society. It's Damage and Liberty Bell, where Damage has he had his face disfigured by Zoom, and he finally has his rematch with Zoom, and they're in a stalemate. where if he could kill Zoom, but then Zoom would blow up half the city. And Liberty Bell walks in and she points to the Liberty Bell logo on her chest and she says, just because something has a crack in it doesn't mean you have to throw it away. And that still gets like a chill up my spine just telling you guys about it.
Speaking of Johns,
yeah.
are you reading the Three Jokers?
I'm a little behind. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I do love his work with Jason Fabok. I really liked their team up on Justice League. Amazo War, or Amazo War, however you pronounce his name. That was probably my favorite of the new 52 Justice League arcs. So it's on my stack of things that I gotta catch up on once the Kickstarter's done. But yeah, I mean, some of it's also maybe a little nostalgia on my part. His run on Green Lantern, particularly
Amazing.
Secret Origins, I interned on that at DC. And so, that really, I love his run on Teen Titans. So, those things really, those speak to me in a big way. But, there's so many other things, like you wouldn't expect the Babs Tarr run on Batgirl. Huge influence on me. I love how they compressed the storytelling. And so they had done in one stories, but they also had like a meta arc across their, that's something that I always really tried to do with my stories, because Heidi McDonald over at Comics Beat used to talk about something called the satisfying chunk. And if I'm expecting readers to buy this serialized, I want to make sure that you're getting your money's worth with every chapter. But yeah, I could go on and on. I could talk to you guys for a whole other podcast about influences, but yeah, for me, my mother's a college professor, so I've always kind of loved that love of learning. And that's the cool thing about comics, is that you read stuff and then you're like, okay, that's a cool trick. Like, that's something I'm going to add to the toolbox. And then every script you tackle is like a different Rubik's Cube. And, for me, I never figure it out on the first try. It's always me constantly trying to figure it out. Like I'm blindfolded and trying to find it out through touch.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
But that's kind of part of the fun, I think, at least for me, is it's, my grandfather always used to say, nothing worth doing comes easy. And I feel that's exactly the case for telling a story.
Awesome.
So, comics aside,
Yeah.
what else do you nerd out on?
Oh man, when I can, I love playing video games. I do worry that sometimes the industry might have left me behind. And it's something I think about with the comics industry a lot, is I'm sure there are a lot of people who used to read comics and then they got too complicated and they're like, I can't get into comics. But there are things like Fallout 4. I had to actually stop myself from playing that game, that and Skyrim, because I was like, I won't get any work done.
That's right.
Monster Prom on Switch has been my guilty pleasure lately. It's so funny that you're like, okay, I didn't expect this game to be hilarious. I am really excited to play Ghost of Tsushima.
Tsushima. I just finished that game. It's so good.
I downloaded that. That's my reward for when the Kickstarter's over.
There it is.
Same thing with Avengers.
I'm in the middle
really
of that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk. I really hope that game is good.
Looks cool.
Yeah. For me, it's Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I like that. I like watching TV. Movies. Those are sort of the things that I've had time to do my bandwidth, and also just kind of staying at home. But at the same time, what have I been doing keeping busy? Actually, we're on the prowl for a new puppy. Our previous dog, unfortunately, she passed just before COVID struck. And so now that I've sort of had a little bit of time to regroup, that's sort of what we're pounding the pavement on when I'm not doing the Kickstarter. But yeah, I'm already at the point where I'm like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life when this is done? And the answer is I have 4 scripts that I need to work on.
There it is.
Actually, that's a good segue.
Again.
Read your mind.
That's right.
Speaking of the rest of your life, which I hope is long, by the way.
Yes, me too.
Taking your Hollywood experience into account, do you have any short or maybe long-term ambitions of bringing your work to the screen?
Sure. Spencer and Locke was optioned, and there's not a ton I can talk about where it's at right now because of NDAs, and also because Hollywood is a little bit on pause right now just with the pandemic. But we've been in conversations with some really cool people as far as that goes. It's one of those things. The tough thing for me, I've found as a creator in comics who's now navigating Hollywood, is there are things that happen that you are not allowed to talk about because the ball is in their court to talk about it. And I got spoiled early in that, like when we were optioned, it was announced. Whereas now I've had more complicated dealings in Hollywood, and I'm like, oh man, I really wish I could tell the world about this, and I can't. So yeah, I mean, for me, my philosophy is always, I'm not out to make comics into IP. I think there are certain creators who do that, and it shows. For me, I've always said I want to make the best damn comic I can, and then if somebody wants to make something out of that, I can sleep at night. I do find that I living in Los Angeles, I have a lot of film and TV screenwriters ask me, how do I make a comic, because I want to sell it as a script. And I always say, do you have 5 figures to spend? Do you have 9 months of time to burn on this? And they usually quickly kind of like, oh, I didn't realize this was hard. And it's like, no, this is the hardest job I've ever done, but it's the most worthwhile. Wow. But yeah, for me, I always say, ultimately, make a good comic and success in multimedia follows. But yeah, I would never say no, because it all feeds back to, how do we build the widest possible audience? And so, if they made a Spencer and Locke TV show or a Going to the Chapel film, and it was good, and that is also sort of my criteria, is I would rather no adaptation than a bad one.
Right.
Then yeah, it's just a way to bring more readers to the fold. And I couldn't want anything more than that.
Nice.
Ladies and gentlemen, David Pepose, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
There's a lot more I wanted to ask you, but I just kind of like pulled it in. So hopefully you'll come back on the show eventually. One more. So the Kickstarter ends on the 16th.
Yes. Wednesday morning of the 16th. It'll end, I think, around 10:30 a.m. Eastern, or 7:30 a.m. Pacific, my time. So yes. So get in your pledges. Every backer matters. Every dollar counts. If you want to follow the book, you can go to the OZ Comic on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can go to bit.ly/the OZ Comic. It'll take you straight to the Kickstarter page. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Pepose D. It's my last name, first initial.
The links are all in the description.
That's right.
Perfect. David Pepose Comics on Facebook, or you can subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/Pep News. It's where I tease all of my projects. We were teasing the OZ for a year on that thing. So sign up if you want to know what I'm working on next.
Awesome. So,
cool.
Depending on when you're watching this, go be a backer. Or if you're watching this later, just go buy the book, because it's badass anyway. All right, guys, take it easy. Don't forget to wash your hands, wear your mask, and be social distance. We're out of here.
And watch a show because you want to and not because of the threats. Thank you for watching Judah, Robo, and Ree. We talk about comics, movies, and TV. Sometimes we have notable guests, and sometimes it's just us. But we're also cool.